I didn't have time to bring my own.
Hey, here you go. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So that's not.
Start the video. I have to excuse myself.
Here it goes.
Okay. And I have to turn this on, right? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear everyone all right?
Yes.
All right, so just as a quick disclaimer, everyone, at the check-in table up front, there's a sheet with an agenda and then there's space underneath for questions. We're gonna ask that if you have a question that you either send it via email to the local marijuana email listed there, or that you write it down and then drop those back off at the front table. We will then read them afterwards and try to answer as many questions as possible. All right, but first we're gonna do some introductions.
Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you to our advisory committee. This is our initial meeting where we are going to be talking about the work of the committee, making sure that we all understand what the expectations are and what the timeline is with respect to where the state is now. For those of you who are joining us, you're here to observe. We will have meetings in the future that will be seeking public input and where we will be responding to that public input. But this is our very first organizing meeting of this advisory committee. And just to let you understand what this advisory committee is going to be doing, they are going to be helping us as a city determine how we want to structure the various aspects of legalization that are within the city's realm to control. And that includes our zoning code, time, place, and manner, and really having an understanding of impacts and concerns from the community with respect to licenses that are going to be issued by the state. The state is ultimately going to be the entity that determines who's going to get licenses. That licensing process is being managed by the state. The other thing that this group is going to be doing is helping to advise us with respect to how we can potentially assist those who are seeking to put in applications for the city of Albany, understand the rules of the road. And so for those of you who have questions, please save those questions, but we do want to level set expectations. The individuals around this to represent our common council and council members. And very importantly, we have 16 members of the public who were selected out of about 50 applications of those who applied because of their background and experience and the person's legal expertise with those who were formerly justice involved to really help myself as a decision maker, as well as our planning department and our common council, really understand what the desires are of our community, what the recommendations are for this community moving forward. This entity, this group does not have any legal authority, regulatory authority. They will not be promulgating regulations. They will merely be advising us. And then it's the policymakers around this table and at City Hall, including the entire Common Council, that will be tasked with then making and implementing changes if necessary to our code, implementing rules of the road with respect to how we're going to treat revenue that the city anticipates that it will be receiving once dispensaries and consumption sites are open. And so it will be in that advisory capacity that this group will be working. So I think that with that, we will allow, and I'm going to kick it back to Jasmine, who is the person in my office who is responsible for overseeing this process, to make introductions of the individuals who are going to be helping us as we forge into new territory. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. So my name again is Jasmine Higgins. I'm the policy analyst in the mayor's office, and I'm very happy to be with you here today. We're going to start on this end of the room, and we're going to ask that each member here introduce themselves with their name, the neighborhood that they either live in or work in, why they applied and why they're here. And then if you're a city department head or council member, please introduce yourself with your title as well.
My name is William Yeager. My name is Trads. I've been in the city of Albany since I was born. I was justicely involved in 1999. I did 4 years in federal prison, and it was a conspiracy to transport marijuana, still illegal at that time, still illegal now in the federal system. I own many businesses in Albany. I feel as though that I'd be an added asset to this community to help guide or do whatever I can do to do it for the best for the Albany city of Albany in general. Like, it's really important to make sure that we give back to the community, make sure that this isn't where people just come and profiteer, where actually like people and change can happen and this money could go to helping other impoverished peoples and people that need help.
Thank you.
Rick LaJoy, I'm the Director of Billings and Regulatory Compliance, and I'm from the Beverwick neighborhood.
Joe Toomey, Deputy Chief, Albany Fire Department, Upper Western Avenue neighborhood.
Danielle Gillespie, City Clerk. I am from the 12th Ward, and I'm very happy to be here.
Good evening, Avi Epstein, Principal Planner with the Department of Planning. Currently moving into the city of Albany, so I'm looking forward to that. Mostly just working on the land use management and zoning side of things.
Good evening. My name is Carolyn McLaughlin. I'm happy to have the opportunity to represent the Albany County Legislature. In this capacity, I currently represent the 1st District, which is situated in the south end of Albany. And I am privileged to be here in the name of equity, in the name of economic development and equitable distribution of site selection, equitable distribution and in revenue sharing, and to help those who are interested in this process to navigate the system such that it does not go the way of they not have technical assistance in terms of having the opportunity to have access to this opportunity. I believe that it's important that we don't let this go the way of the tobacco settlement, that we don't let it go the way of the lottery, the way money was supposed to be provided for education. And do we see it? I don't feel it. Do we see it as it relates to distribution of revenue from the tobacco settlement many years ago? So in the name of equity, that's why I sit here, and I'm proud to have the opportunity to serve.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tabor Marcus. I am the president of the West Hill Neighborhood Association. I'm also the owner of TBE Property Management LLC, a company that advocates for communities that were affected by the cannabis prohibition. My focus here is on health, education, and awareness around consumption. So I'm happy to be a part of this board, and I hope that we can do some wonderful things within the city.
Good evening. My name is Joyce Love. I'm the 3rd Ward representative. I represent Arbor Hill and Sherton Hollow. I'm a lifelong resident. I'm getting involved because I want to make sure that whatever that share that the 3rd Ward get whatever share they can. I like to support the whole city, but I'm more worried about the 3rd Ward right now. Thank you.
My name is Kasim Swain. I'm the founder of Flagship Ultra. From the South End neighborhood. I live in Arbor Hill. Razik Seabrook. I live in Pine Hills currently. Why am I here? As of 2018, I was a deputy chief of staff at the Department of Labor, so really ensuring that the labor protections were inherent in the bill to ensure that there are strong protections for the workers in the industry. From 2019 to 2020, I worked for the governor and a private communications firm, really ensuring that the MRTA was passed, not the CRTA. So for those who go back a number of years, that the other bill that was passed really was an economic component with some social equity provisions. Whereas when we passed MRTA, it's really about restorative justice that happens to have a fiscal component to it. So really during that time, I'm working to ensure that was passed. And now I currently work for myself, and I'm here to very much ensure that the infrastructure is ready and willing and available to those who are most harmed by the war on drugs, to make sure that they have an opportunity, and also that local policy, because at the end of the day, we pass a lot of laws on state level, but really they're implemented by those, on the state, at these agencies, at OCM, like that, and many other individuals that you see around this table. So really here to ensure that, those who have a subject matter expertise in this, but also who understand the real world implications of those most harmed by this, kind of bridging that nexus to ensure that the city of Albany takes its rightful place as it relates to the overall state framework.
Good evening. My name is Lydia Broussard. I'm a labor organizer. I live in Pine Hills. I was attracted to this committee because of the mayor's commitment to transparent public engagement. My main emphases are social equity, repair, and public health and education.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Rivera. I was born and raised in Newburgh, New York. I've been up in Albany now for about 17 years. I'm a 25-year Black legacy as well as an advocate for cannabis.
I'd like to thank the mayor for allowing me to participate with the committee. My name is Robert Anderson. I've lived in Albany for 20 plus years. I have 25 plus years experience in government relations and policy. I worked on the initial inception of the cannabis legislation, and I really care about the community. I have 3 children who go to school, in the city, and I want to work with everyone, make sure, things go in a smooth way, at least from the first go around.
Hello, my name is Saladin Amir. I guess I lived in this city for a long time since I was 10, went to school here. I'm justice impacted. I was arrested for marijuana, did 3 years. Now I'm an electrician at the state. I also work with Black Cannabis Industry Association on the state level to address the social equity issue. And I'm having conversations with a lot of important people who want to do the right thing, just like everybody here on the panel. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Bob Wishnoff, 50-year resident of Albany. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. Been involved in the practice of drug and alcohol counseling and assessments and evaluations for over 40 years. I've lived in various parts of the city, from 35 years on South Lake Avenue to or uptown by SUNY to now over Albany Shaker Road area, and just want to be a part of the work that I've been doing professionally and personally as a member of the advisory board, as a good citizen in the city of Albany.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lee Kinlan. I'm a lawyer. I'm born and raised in Albany. Moved back here after a stint on active duty in the Marine Corps, and I've been a resident of the Capital District ever since. Looking to help in whatever way I can.
My name is Nick Ames, and I just thank Jasmine and the mayor's office for me being here. I'm a former mathematics teacher. I'm an engineer by trade, and I live in the South End ever since 2004. So I'm happy to be here. Anything I can do to help, I'd like to do that.
Well, I want to thank Jasmine and the mayor for allowing me to be a part of this committee. My name is Quinn Lee. I'm originally from Buffalo. I've been in this area for about 2 years. I'm a director at a local not-for-profit that stretches from Albany to Plattsburgh. I'm really here to learn and to also be a part of ensuring that there is social equity involved in these decisions that we're going to be assisting in making. And I'm proud that we're going to be a part of building a framework that's going to be an example for the rest of the state of New York.
Hi, my name is John McGuire. I'm an inspector with the University of Police at the University of Albany. 22 and a half years experience there. And during the course of my time as a police officer, I am a drug recognition expert as well as police instructor. What drugs can do when they are not handled correctly. So I also was fortunate enough to travel to Colorado and see what happened with the positive aspects of legalization of recreational marijuana, as well as some of the negative aspects. So I'm here to just offer my experience. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sergio Adams. I'm the council member for Albany 7th Ward, which covers the Hudson Park, Delaware Avenue, and Helderberg neighborhoods. I decided to join this committee to get educated, but also maybe to spread awareness to individuals here in the city of Albany, and making sure that when it comes to economic development, that our neighborhoods and cities actually see money going towards changes, and we can actually have a structure that not only supports small business,
but make it accessible for everyday people to start.
Good evening, I'm Matt Calvarez, I'm an attorney. I work at City Hall in the Corporation Counsel's office. In my role, I work with the Community Police Review Board and also the Police Department's command staff. And I work with Jazz on some special projects like our condition clinic and community resource fair, which we did touch on the emergency legislation and marijuana ceiling at that clinic. I'm just happy to be here, contribute where I can.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriela Romero. I am the council member for the sixth ward in Palm County Council. In my day job, I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I see a lot of the lingering effects of the wrong drugs. So my singular focus here is to ensure that we have a restorative justice aspect to the rules and regulations that we're doing.
Good evening. Apologize for being a little late. All of you know today's election day, so I wanted to make sure my poll workers got their dinner. My name is Alfredo Ballin. I'm a council representative for the 11th ward. I've been in the city for 20 years. I want to thank the mayor for putting this committee together. I think it's a good way for us to move forward with government, business, and community engaged in the process. And that's how we're going to look at making some tough decisions and make sure we do them for the benefits of the residents. I'm going to be a little blunt, like my colleague in love. I want to make sure that what's good for Central Avenue is also good for Western Avenue. When we put something on Scotland Avenue, don't think of putting it on Central Avenue. So that's, I want to make sure that we look at this in a fair, ethical manner, and also want to make sure that it benefits the residents of the city of Albany. I think it's great that it benefits business, but if this is only focused on making business better, that's not going to make our city better. So that's my focus of making sure how we can move this process along, benefiting the people who live in our city and who are here day in and day out. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to move to the PowerPoint presentation that I have for everyone. Just bear with me for a moment while I share my screen.
Did okay.
Can everyone see that all right? All right, so we've accomplished the first item, which is introductions. Now we're going to just briefly talk about the process of forming the advisory committee. We received 50+ applications from residents of the city of Albany, business owners, and folks who are just generally interested in working with the city of Albany. Out of those, we had approximately 38% or 38 people were eligible. And we then conducted an interview process, which is how we got to the 16-member advisory board that has then been added to by our department heads and our common council members. So now we're going to get into the fun stuff. So the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, MRTA, was signed into law on March 31st, 2021, and it authorizes the lawful use of adult use recreational cannabis for individuals 21+. It establishes the cannabis law, the New York State Cannabis Control Board, and the New York State Office of Cannabis Management and their powers and duties. It also authorizes individuals 21+ to possess, display, purchase, obtain, or transfer up to 3 ounces, the equivalent of 84 grams, and up to 24 grams of concentrated cannabis, such as vapor, oil, or an edible. It also authorizes individuals 21+ to use, smoke, ingest, and consume cannabis. In addition, you can possess up to 5 pounds of cannabis at your personal residence or grounds if you are 21 or over. So one of the main things that we think it's very important to discuss is what the state's responsibility is and what the locality's responsibility is, in this case, Albany. So the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, also referred to as OCM, is responsible for overseeing the licensure, the cultivation, the production, distribution, sale, and taxation of medical, pardon the typo, adult use and cannabinoid hemp in New York State. OCM is also responsible for developing regulations outlining how and when business and individuals can participate in the new industry. There's also the New York State Cannabis Control Board, which acts as the approval and oversight body of the Office of Cannabis Management. They're responsible for approving the New York State cannabis industry regulations, including issuing applications and licenses to cannabis businesses. They post their meeting links and their meeting notes to their website, all of which can be found on our marijuana legalization page at the city website. So with respect to what localities like Albany can do, we can pass local laws and regulations related to the time, place, and manner. So it's very similar to liquor license processes and things of that nature. And we're actually going to have a member of our planning department give a more thorough overview of that in just a moment. So a deeper dive into local control of cannabis. Localities have control over the following: the time, place, and manner, which is related to local zoning, the location of a licensee, the hours of operation, and adherence to local building codes. The one thing that the MRTA states is it cannot be unreasonably impractical that the city make any regulations that essentially make it impossible to open up any type of dispensary or consumption lounge or facility. The other thing that we have purview over and oversight of is the process for reviewing a notice made by an entity that wishes to apply for an adult use retail dispensary or on-site consumption license. Danielle, I'm actually going to have you just briefly provide an overview of that process that we've started working on, please.
So basically, this process, we're going to keep it simple and we're going to go with what we know kind of sort of works. We have a very similar process in place with the New York State Liquor Authority, and anyone interested in obtaining a license is required to put the municipality on notice. Have some feedback from individuals who have previously applied for the New York State liquor license and the process and the things that they felt were difficult. So we're going to try and minimize and simplify that. Some of the feedback that we've gotten is it's primarily a pen and paper process. So we're going to look to digitize this, because what we don't want to have in place is a process that is not intuitive and seamless for the notification piece. So basically, we're just going to mirror what's currently in place because we know that that works. And then we push the information out to participating internal departments within the city of Albany. So buildings and regulatory compliance, the fire department, the police department, possibly the business improvement districts, because we want to make sure all partners are informed. The council as a whole will be informed as well and solicit feedback. And we're assuming that the Office of Cannabis Management will also mirror the process on their end with regard to hearings if, the issuance of a license requires a hearing. So that's currently where we are. But again, this is a moving target and the plane is being built in the air, but we're flexible and it's an office filled with professionals. We're very adaptable.
Thank you, Danielle. One of the other things that municipalities like Albany have control over is how the local excise tax and sales tax gets reinvested. So after any operational costs that are associated with the legalization of cannabis, how do we reinvest this money into the community? And how do people want to see that? And that's something that we'll be soliciting input and collecting feedback for at the meetings that are to come after this one. And the last two things that we believe we have control over are a fine structure related to the maintenance of personal cultivation. So if you're someone who's growing at home and it's not being kept in a safe location, what might that fine look like? Is if it's accessible to someone under 21% or 21 years old, you might be subject to a fine. And then the last thing that we have oversight of is any additional laws regarding public consumption of cannabis. So right now you can smoke cannabis or consume cannabis anywhere you can consume a cigarette. That means that you cannot smoke in city parks. Right now, the MRTA states that you cannot smoke within 200 and 500 feet of a school and a house of worship. So the city could make additional, more restrictive regulations, or we could not add any regulations to this, to the laws regarding public consumption of cannabis. So the next slide we're going to have presented by our member of the planning department, Avi Epstein.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the USDO, which is the primary land use management tool that the city has. People might be more familiar with the being referred to as the zoning code. In particular, we have several things that the USDO really manages, from definitions, which are important to make distinction between different uses, whether that's consumption lounges or controlled substance dispensaries, which is an example of something we have currently in the code. It also regulates the permitted uses, whether something is permitted in a particular district, if it's not permitted, if it's conditionally permitted. We also have use-specific standards. So for certain uses within the city, you can have more information regarding the location, hours of operation, other details that might be related to how a store has to provide certain parking or signage, lighting. And then more generally, there are the development standards, which pertain to things that are typically applicable to all properties and land uses, such as parking, landscaping, screening. And this would be applicable to any other business use in the city. And lastly, just the procedures that are outlined within the USDO. So this entails, how to open a new business. So the city isn't the one necessarily issuing the license, but depending on if it's a building that's undergoing new construction, it might need planning board review. If it's something that the city decides needs a conditional use permit, it would need to go to the planning board. So those are the items outlined in the USDO, and they can certainly be, up to the committee to discuss further. Here we have the permitted and conditionally permitted uses by location. So the table you're looking at here is just looking at the controlled substance dispensary. And then you have the different uses categorized by column. So the current regulations were developed in response to the legalization of medical marijuana in 2014, when the USDO was adopted, and then there were additional changes or amendments that were made in December of 21 to make the existing allowances broadened from medical to recreational. So the definition in the code changed to allow that. Based on the USDO controlled substance dispensaries, which includes cannabis, they're permitted in the light industrial and general industrial zoning districts, and they're permitted with a conditional use permit in several mixed use districts, such as the MUCH, Community Highway, the Campus and Institutional District, Form-Based Warehouse, and the Form-Based Central Ave zoning districts. I know there were previously questions on conditional use permits, so I'll just go into that a little bit. Conditional use permit is something that's subject to the planning board for review. There are a set of standards that the planning board uses to review any conditional use permit. They are general in the sense that the set of standards that's used applies to any conditional use permit, whether it's for a marijuana dispensary or another use that would require a conditional use permit. Part of the things that are considered in conditional use permits are the community character, environmental or fiscal impacts, the current or potential development patterns, burdens on public facilities, and then just general consistency with the USDO and zoning requirements in general. And the planning board and staff specifically looks to see if the intended purpose of the zoning district, as was laid out through the comprehensive plan, to see if those meet the intended use that's being proposed within a particular zoning district or neighborhood. Here we just have an example. This goes back to what Jasmine was referencing with some of the current restrictions on the 200 and 500 foot restrictions on where you'd be able to sell marijuana. So looking on the map here, you can see there's the MUFC, which is the mixed use form-based Central Ave in yellow. This is an area that currently in the code would allow for marijuana dispensaries as a conditional use permit. But if we were to look up in the top right-hand corner where it says I-1, so light industrial zoning district, this district, for example, would allow it as of right. So it would not require the conditional use permit. And you can also see in the middle of the map, there's a school that's highlighted, and the parcels that are highlighted in red are all ones that would be ineligible based on the 500-foot buffer. Even though they're in a district that does allow it conditionally, they would be ineligible based on its proximity to a school. And there's additional information on the city website that outlines the various locations of schools and houses of worship, showing the different boundaries, kind of giving an idea of where these businesses could potentially locate. Also, some of the considerations within the USDO, the legislative action would be needed by the Common Council to amend the USDO to allow medical or recreational dispensaries in areas that are not currently permitted. So if we go back to the permitted use table, it doesn't allow them in all the districts. So that's going to be part of the discussion and determination of where those would be allowed. Currently, it's not permitted in 6 out of the 10 mixed use, which is more the commercial zoning districts. It'll also be a consideration of whether these should be allowed as permitted as of right or conditional use permits, or maybe there's an alternative solution to this. There's also the ability to add language under use specific standards. So maybe there's more specific language that we want that's really tailored to a particular use that's maybe not as applicable to some other uses within the city. And currently the USDO does not address cannabis lounges or on-site consumption lounges. So this is something that would need to be, discussed and amended by the Common Council as well. And then just for some further considerations as we have this ongoing discussion, to be mindful of the MRTA's requirements of local municipalities so that the dispensaries or on-site consumption facilities are not regulated in a manner that makes them unable to actually operate within the city's boundaries. So you can't say it's allowed, but then over-regulate it in such a way where no one can actually locate a business within the city. A lot of times municipalities would want to look at similar uses. So for example, on-site consumption, there's some similarities you could draw with bars and taverns where there's on-site consumption. Currently, bars and taverns are permitted in 6 of the mixed use districts as of right, and they're conditionally permitted in 3 of the other mixed use districts. You also have general retail, which is somewhat similar to a retail establishment in other regards. And those are permitted as of right in 9 of the mixed use districts and conditionally permitted in 1 other district.
Thank you, Avi. So the reason we bring all that up is because right now where someone can locate a dispensary is really limited to the warehouse district, parts of the South End, and then along Central Ave, really. And we want to find out from the community, which is why we're going to have feedback sessions. Do people want to see those expanded? Would you like to see it along the Pine Hills corridor, along New Scotland or Madison Ave? Do you want to see it along South Pearl, along Lark Street, those types of main corridors? So if that is something that folks want, then we have to discuss potentially changing the USDO and doing some Common Council legislation. So that's why we bring that all up. And also because the New York State Office of Cannabis Management has announced that on this Thursday, they'll be announcing and launching the portal for the Conditional Adult Use Recreational Dispensary License, also known as CARD, which is available to folks who have been justice involved and have a marijuana-related conviction. That'll go live on Thursday and will then close in about a month in late September. And once those applications are then reviewed and OCM determines who's going to get a license, we'll be having this conversation about, okay, where can I now locate my dispensary potentially? So we've put together an interactive map that's available on the city website. You can type in really just about any address within the city limits, and you can find out whether that particular address, you can locate a dispensary there. Right now, we don't have the ability to locate on-site consumption facilities, but we do want to consider that as part of these conversations. So to provide everyone an idea of where the city's been thus far and some of the work that we've been doing on the back end to prepare for this, we created the marijuana legalization webpage that has some information about the MRTA, the consumption of marijuana, specifically where you can and can't consume it. a link to the New York State OCM licensing webpage, and some additional cannabis-related resources, some of which are included at the back table where you checked in, including some of the information about card and eligibility. We've also created an interactive GIS map, which is a geographic information system map. Really just lets you do what I just explained briefly, type in the address. It'll then break down that table that Avi showed us and went over briefly. It'll list that use category, how close it is to any particular school or house of worship, or whether it's in a area that is just not permitted to have a dispensary. We've also drafted a model city clerk notification system for any entity, whether that's an individual or a nonprofit interested in opening a cannabis dispensary. We formed the Cannabis Advisory Committee that you see here today. And we are grateful for everyone for applying and for joining us. So to give everyone a very brief overview of what the conditional adult use recreational dispensary license is, also known as CARD. It's the first adult use retail dispensary license to be issued in New York State. It will establish a business owned by justice-involved individuals who have been most impacted by the prohibition of cannabis. To be eligible, an individual must be justice involved, convicted of a marijuana-related offense in New York State before March 31st, 2021, which is when the MRTA was passed. You had to have had a parent, legal guardian, child, spouse, or dependent who was convicted of a marijuana-related offense prior to that same date, or you must have been the dependent of someone who was convicted of a marijuana-related offense in New York State before that date. We've also linked to the CARD resource website. The state has done a really nice job of giving some very informative fact sheets and just overviews of really what the application will look like. That's going to go live on Thursday, kind of a breakdown by question, and then some descriptions of all the materials that you might need if you want to apply for a license. So if you are someone who's had a marijuana conviction, you'll need to show proof of that conviction. You'll also need to show proof of residency, things like that. So they've given a very good overview of everything that an applicant might need. And part of the discussion that we're going to have here is how can we assist people who want to apply to own a dispensary and operate a dispensary in the city of Albany, or a consumption facility, a grow facility, urban farming, all those types of things. That's what we're here for and what we want the community to provide us some feedback about. All right, so we are at the end of the presentation. Just to reiterate, if you do have a question, we ask that you please write your question on the sheet that was available at the front desk. You can tear it off from the bottom. It asks you if you want to add your name. You can also add contact information and the neighborhood that you live in if you'd like, that's optional. And then we'll collect those questions in about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll read them out and we'll try and answer as many as we can. If we can't get through all of them, we will then follow up with you after the fact. But we appreciate everyone coming here today. So if you do have questions, please leave them with the gentleman to the left of the table in the back corner. Thank you, everybody.
It is so cold. Sleep in weather. I had a blanket, I'd be super happy. No micro.
All right, so while everyone is writing down any type of questions that you might have, we're just gonna go over the last bits of information. So everyone was kind enough to have an introductory meeting where all the committee members met one another, just to give an idea of who everyone is and who they'll be working with. But one of the things that's coming out after this meeting is a public meeting schedule where we're gonna be collecting community input. We've drafted some surveys that the advisory committee is going to provide some feedback about, a bunch of different questions about land use and planning. We know that some people are going to be concerned about noise or odor with a business, parking, all that type of stuff. So we've drafted that survey. We're drafting a fact sheet too to help people who are interested in opening up any type of business or just operating within the marijuana industry. That's forthcoming as well. And then this group is going to elect a chair. So there are about, I believe, 8 to 10 city employees here, and we've got 16 community members. they're going to decide amongst themselves who is going to be the chair that's ultimately going to really provide the leadership and guidance that's going to help this committee move forward and solicit community feedback and really just try and make the best landscape possible for our residents and our community members here. We hope to announce all of that information next week, including the chair and the full meeting schedule. And we'll also go over all those survey and outreach materials that we've been working on producing for everyone. Thank you.
So before we address any questions that people may have, I'd like to start with the members of the committee. Are there any questions, comments, and suggestions? What we went through, there's a lot. And so I'm thinking subcommittees are probably going to be an effective way of dealing with this. I see people shaking their hands and raising their hands. So, if people would just allow the group to, this is the first time they've met in person, but for them to talk amongst themselves and maybe set some ground rules and ask questions.
And I'm going to mute the mics oh, Matt, go ahead, ask your question first.
Thank you. I have a question for Avi, I think. He has a right, or you can have these dispensaries as of right that, makes sense. It probably easier to say have them there. Conditional use, kind of wondering what are the conditions or what are the parameters, like what's the difference between those two, or that might be helpful.
So for as of right, essentially it would not, in most cases, have to go to the planning board unless it meets some other trigger that would require planning board review. Unlikely to be the case. For the conditional use permits, it's really more conditional in the sense of it has to meet those standards that are listed within the USDO. That essentially make sure it's not going to be a burden on a particular community and those other things. There are other conditions that the planning board could place on it. But you'd want to make sure those would be kind of set and there'd be a certain precedent so that one particular business is not being given a condition that another business isn't necessarily, because the idea isn't necessarily to regulate behavior more so that it is just like the land use component to it. That answers it.
Yeah, that's all.
I'll follow up to that. So if that's
Correlated, meeting has conditional permits, and then subsequent questions to the extent that they're deciding those locations
of where these dispensaries are going to be located, are we already having conversations with them regarding where these build outs are going to occur? And is that subject to where things are currently zoned for, or will they be granted conditional permits relative to where they?
Yeah, the conditional permits that you're referring to from the state are different from like the conditional use permit from the planning board, for example. I don't know the specific details on the state's conditional license. I think that's more to do with the licensing as opposed to.
They're selecting where these locations go. So I guess direct question to the extent that our zoning as of right, the subsequent conditional use to the extent that they're deciding where these things go. Is that exclusive them to as right? Are we giving them conditional use exceptions?
I don't know offhand, but I mean, it would be allowed in areas that allow it as a conditional use as well. Yeah, I mean, there is a little more uncertainty because technically it could be denied if it didn't meet those certain conditions, but it, generally it is allowed. For the most part, conditional use permits are granted. There are times when they're denied or not granted where the applicant or the project doesn't meet certain elements.
I have a quick question. Do we have a number on how many dispensaries are the city of Albany going to be allowed? Based upon the USDO and that map, how many?
I'm not aware of that. I mean, the USDO doesn't cap it because it's really just a carryover of what was previously in the code under the medical or the controlled substance dispensaries. So right now, that would be something, for example, that could be under like a specific use standard that could say, we're capping it at 10 or 15, but those are considerations. It's not in there right now, though.
Well, and at this moment, that's something being determined by the state. A few months back, the State Office of Cannabis Management, who we've been working closely with to get a lot of these updates, reached out to ask for some arrest data from the city of Albany with respect to cannabis-related arrests. They're using that data to then determine where the cannabis dispensaries that are a part of this card process will be located. So it's not something that the city really has much authority over. That's really being almost exclusively determined by the state. We have provided them with some of the information that they've requested, but it's not necessarily within our authority.
Was that helpful?
Based on what you just said, if the majority of the arrest and the justice-based situations have taken place in, obviously, based on the areas that have been designated, the South End, I think you said the Warehouse District and Central Avenue are those areas that have been, I guess, tentatively approved. There, you could find a proliferation of dispensaries and permitted use sites in those areas, and that could have a negative impact on those communities. So where do we fall in terms of determining other places that dispensaries will be allowed? Because I have some concern about that, about the South End where I live, there being a proliferation, be it on South Pearl Street, be it just going down Morton Avenue or wherever into the deep South End, that's where they all are. That's a concern to me.
I think that's part of what we have to discuss.
Yes.
And look at the view of and see where else, they can fit proper, because we want to make sure, like I said before, it's good for Central Avenue, it should be good for Scott, Western Avenue. So, we have to have those conversations and see, how we do it. I do think, if I remember the conversation from, is that the state is doing it by county and then based on the arrest. Sorry?
Well, state, you get to decide, so at least.
No, I'm not talking about the location, I'm talking about license. If I understand correctly, and I may be wrong, it's gonna be by the county, and based on the arrest, it will be divvied up by the county where it would impact it more. So yes, Albany's gonna get billed per share, so is the holes, so is Water Relief, so is other cities in Albany County that have seen, arrest in this area. So I think we have to make a decision on where we'd like to have these locations in our city. But then to the state that tells us how many locations we can have at the end of the day.
So let's say there's 30. I don't want to see 30 between Madison Avenue. I don't want to see 15 between Madison Avenue and Mount Hope. That would cause me a lot of problems.
Absolutely.
So the equitable distribution throughout, there are some areas that, like you said, New Scotland Avenue, they're not currently on the approved list up there. So I thought I heard somewhere that there was a statement that we would determine if there would be other areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, through council. I have something to add on. The question you asked was how many licenses? New York State is offering up 200 conditional licenses. 100 of those are for impacted people. So 100 licenses will be distributed throughout the state. That means Albany may only see 10. They may only see 5.
If they can find.
Absolutely. And that should be something we have in conversations around how many this city, the capacity can uphold as to how we regulate things or how things will take place. I
And where they
believe we
exist.
have to make sure that not only are we bringing these dispensaries in, that we are educating people while we're bringing them in. That's one of the biggest issues we are going to be faced with on this particular board. So.
Absolutely, and I was gonna add something too.
City of Albany as it relates to OCM and DASN as it relates to the first 100 to 150 licenses for the conditional use. They've yet to determine that exact number. That's as of Chris Alexander's mouth under something that went live today. What's going to happen is as you submit your application, you rank your location, right? So the 5 boroughs are each a location respectively. The capital region writ large is a location, Western New York, et cetera, et cetera. The social equity fund, which is a $200 million fund that is being constructed by DASNY, that is being owned and operated by a separate third-party entity, is then subsequently responsible for acquiring these locations, for building them out and getting them ready for use justice involvement to operate them as retail dispensaries. So I just wanted to be clear that what we're doing here is in the advisory capacity, because again, we should certainly organize and advocate to your point. Like Councilwoman, I don't know if they call you.
County legislature.
County legislature, my apologies. Nevertheless, it's an advisory committee so that we can go and advocate to OCM, hey, to the extent that you are procuring locations, you are building out these locations, we suggest that you not concentrate in these certain areas, which is why I asked the zoning question, right? To the extent that the state is making decisions about where these things are going based off existing zoning codes, they're kind of required to, satisfy the critical mass of where people are deciding where these things go. So that's why I would just try to figure out that there's a timing component to this as well, right? Because again, we can't determine how people rank, where they go. People rank, capital region #1, they might rank New York City #1, they might, then subject to capacity and how that they should determine it's going to get shaken out. Say the city of Albany says we're going to take the first 20, we take the first 20. And then if the first 20, depending on where they're located, kind of gets approved. And if we can't fill the first 20, then it kind of goes to tier 2. They're trying to decide whether they're going to be waiting lists. They're trying to decide whether folks have to reapply and things of that nature. But I would just like to, again, in terms of where these things are physically located, as it relates to the first 100, 150 statewide, it's really going to be state determined. So I think that's just faster we can organize, faster that we can get some community input about where these things should be situated would be extremely beneficial so that you don't run into the issue that Madam County Ledge is referring to.
Does that answer everyone's question, complete this portion of the discussion? Do you have another question, Matt?
Yeah, for gentlemen. The fund that you mentioned, the $200 million state equity.
Yes.
Do the card applicants, successful, are they definitely getting access to those funds?
Correct, which is why they don't get to determine where their location will be located. So that's a component of it, is you're applying effectively to be a member of this funding, basically just as involved, kind of that first iteration of folks. It is an open question about if you say don't take the funding, then what happens? Can you still be just as involved, get a conditional license, not be subject to all the restrictions, things of that nature? So those are kind of some of the questions that I flagged, right? Because I think that there are individuals who fit all of the criteria, but may not need the financing. So perhaps they should have a little bit more leeway about what they're allowed to do, but TBD on that.
I'm not sure if this question is for Ivy or maybe Jasmine, but I'm also concerned about the concentration of them in certain areas because that's going to lead to over policing because we're going to have a police presence in these areas, right, to protect customers and I can't say a lot of people or neighbors in certain districts. But if let's say we were to look into large borough area, would we be? I know we're going to have public comment periods, but will we be engaging in local businesses to see how they feel?
Yes, I mean, I think we have to include really everyone in this discussion, right? Businesses are a part of our community, so are the business owners because they're operating a business that is contributing to the tax revenue of our city and to the neighborhood in general. So I think we have to include everyone in this discussion and that we have to be particularly mindful as well of our residents who have been disproportionately harmed and live in communities like the South End, Arbor Hill, West Hill. And that this is really a tall task, right? We have our work cut out for us. It's something that we have to be very thoughtful about and methodical about, and we're going to need to seek very broad input for. So it's definitely something that we're considering and we want to seek additional input for. Does anybody else have any questions from the advisory board? No? Yes.
I think, we definitely want to make sure we do it in an equitable manner, but I also don't think we want to have, there's some negative mentality of what it may be. And I think I want to recommend people to go and travel and go to states or go to Canada, and you can see that a lot of this negative mentality is not what's actually at the stalls, at the dispensary. I was in Canada a couple of weeks ago, and I went, purposely to go see what's coming to Albany, and it felt very medical. Had a list on board, they had every single time counted, very, very medical structure. I know everybody has it differently, but I think it's important for us to be, maybe we should do that as a community and see what Massachusetts, see what, that's not too far from us, about an hour away, and see how it's done there, so that we make sure we don't, over-regulate it based on some fears that may not actually be, reality. And I understand where some of those fears come, especially someone who represents gravity and has seen some negative elements be brought into our neighborhood. So I understand why that fear is very, very real. But I don't want us to lose an opportunity because of more people than you realize. So I want to, just have that back as we're having this conversation.
And thank you, Councilmember. I think one of the things too that a lot of people have been discussing is that yes, other places have done this, but we have a very different city demographically, with respect to our history and social inequity, with respect to cannabis, things like that. So we want to build on that for sure, but we want to build back even better, and more equitable and just more thoughtful in nature. So thank you for that comment. Absolutely. Do any of the, yes.
Is there a difference in permitting between the as of right and conditional permits as relates to like duration of permits, recertification?
Not from the city's side on like the USDO. I mean, that would be different licensing from the state, but that's not impacted whether it's located in an area that's permitted as of right or conditionally permitted.
Thank you. Ms. Broussard.
At the risk of overstructuring, I'm hearing the need for at least 2 subcommittees, and one is public engagement, and they can take on the questions of the survey that we are commenting on. Should that survey be circulated to residents and businesses, or should businesses have their own survey developed? I think that's an important question. And then in terms of public education, which I think is incredibly important, both with regard to the specificity of Albany, but also, trying to dispel any boogeyman sort of ideas and that sort of thing, I think is going to be important for that subcommittee to take on. So just so I do take Razik's point that we should get as organized as possible. So I would just like that, I don't know who's taking minutes, but noted as we sort ourselves out moving forward.
Absolutely. And to your point about the survey question, I think it's important that we have one for residents and then one separate one for businesses, because I think the concerns will be different. And to your point about the focus groups, I think that we are going to end up having focus groups based on the interviews that we did and what everyone has expressed here. You all have very specific interests and areas of expertise. So I think we're going to segment into groups at our next meeting. It's something that we'll discuss internally, and we'll set missions for each group and things like that. And each group will then add any type of survey questions or information specific to that focus, whether it's public engagement, social equity, planning and zoning, things like that. And really, social equity is a part of all of this. Planning and zoning is really about equity. So thank you, Ms. Broussard. Do any of the other advisory committee members have any additional questions, comments right now? Yes.
The public relations and community outreach, will that be managed by the city or by this committee?
So we would appreciate everyone's advice, but we will definitely be doing the legwork. And we would appreciate that help if the community members and the advisory board members would like to join us while we, go knock on doors and pass out flyers and meet people where they are.
That was a question I had, to make sure that we're making sure the outreach reaches the community in a timely manner, so that most of our community are aware of some of the things. I know you mentioned that smoking cannabis is allowed anywhere where cigarettes are allowed, but there is an exception to cars. Most people, we see them now still smoking in the cars. And what we don't want to happen is they're being thrown out of a car and thrown to the ground because they're smoking. So I think it's important that we make sure we're educating the public on usage and where and how they can use cannabis.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that's why we all have a very tight deadline for feedback for some of those documents that I sent out. We want to make sure that we get those into the community and that we have adequate time to tell people about the community feedback sessions that we're going to have and just get everyone educated. So flyers, types of public education campaigns, those types of things. We want to make sure that we're meeting people where they are, bringing it right to them. Do any of the other advisory members have any questions before we get to the questions that some of our guests have asked? No? All right. All right. So we have one question about a drive-through lounge, funding program for card, and then can you use a space you found to lease on your own under all the current zoning rules? So drive-through lounge, that's definitely still something that we would have to talk about and consider. It's maybe even potentially something that the state is preparing to issue legislation about. Funding program for card, we would definitely need to speak further about this because I'm not sure if you're referring to the local level or the state, but with respect to your third question about can you use space you found to lease on your own, so long as that space is zoned to allow for a dispensary, and you can use that GIS map that's available on the city website to type in that address and find out, then you could. If it's as of right or if it's conditionally permitted, that map would help to show you whether that location is permitted or not permitted. All right, we have a question about, oops, sorry. I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well. We have a question about what actions, considerations are being taken to utilize cannabis to boost tourism opportunities in and around Albany. So really all the feedback and all the questions we've got, these are all questions that we have heard from various community members and we continue to hear. And it's something that the advisory board and the mayor and even the folks at the Office of Cannabis Management and the state still have to consider. It's my understanding that the state is still working on some legislation and regulations to issue later this year and potentially early next year. It's possible that they may create some rules that are some of the things that we're discussing here as possibilities. We still don't know that just yet. But these are all things that we want this advisory board to be considering. We want the community to be talking about, but we do not have a determination just yet about what's being done to boost tourism in and around. And then we have a question about, will the city committee employ any evidence-based harm reduction initiatives? If so, how will they be chosen and implemented? I cannot read this last word. And then will guidance from the state be utilized? So again, this is something that the advisory committee needs to discuss, right? We heard one of our county legislator talk about concentrating dispensaries in any one area. Not concentrating dispensary in any one area might be viewed as harm reduction. How do we communicate to people that there are alternatives aside from cannabis, or that cannabis is an alternative from traditional prescription medication, things of that nature? These are all things that this advisory committee, like I said, will be considering. We want feedback from the community. We know that we can't have a 100-person advisory board. That would be very difficult to manage. So we need to hear from all of you and from the folks who haven't joined us here in this room today. Harm reduction is definitely going to be very important and a central point of this conversation. And will be something that we continue to discuss and even create survey questions and public education campaigns about. And then we have an announcement from our friend at the Workforce Development Institute that I think everyone will be interested in hearing. Cricket, would you like to come up here?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cricket Thomas Odell. I'm from Workforce Development Institute, WDI. Some of you I have met previously in my role there. I've had the pleasure, and I call it a pleasure because for someone who grew up in the south end of Albany, I have been working now for the past 5 years with WDI, enabling projects that are going to help people when it comes to workforce development. Economic development is workforce development, so WDI, is a perfect match when it comes to looking at projects that are going to help people become part of the workforce in a way that's going to help them become, as we say, part of that middle class. So when it comes to adult use cannabis, WDI, of course, is very, very involved in this endeavor. We have created our own workforce development, WDI Cannabis Workforce Advisory Board that has people from all across New York State on it, including people from Urban League, NAACP, locally here in the capital region and other places. And the focus of what we're doing currently not only is building a curriculum so that when it comes to helping people learn about how to be involved in this new industry, whether it be from seed, how to plant, how to cultivate, how to distribute, to sale, how to sell it. That curriculum is being written as we speak and should be released right in the month of September. I wanted to share with you today that we're also, as we've done for the past 5 years, and my friends, my husband laugh at me because they say, well, what do you do for a living? I get to give out money. So we are providing funding for cannabis workforce. And in this case, the funding is going to be looking at, again, making sure that we be socially equitable because WDI was founded on social equity. We've been around for almost 20 years now, making sure that when we can be involved in a project that's going to raise up those who have not been part of the workforce. And so the funding that we're looking at providing will measure outcomes for workers, whether they be working in an actual establishment or entrepreneurs. And some of that funding is going to actually look at training, consulting, convening of events, providing equipment, providing wraparound services, looking at capacity building, pipeline programming, and equipment. Now, these grants are typically, we look at them on a reimbursable basis, but in some cases, we'll look at them as being outward grants that you do not have to reimburse. I am not the primary contact for the money, in this case, for the funding, but if you reach out to or go to our website, wdiny.org, information is on there, and a woman who covers the Capital District, because I now have a statewide position, her name is on there, Jean Marie Renke, and she'll be your contact for this funding. Again, thank you for putting together this advisory board. Thank you all for the work that you're going to do to making sure that, as we've heard and seen before, we will make sure that the city of Albany, the city I grew up in, is going to be a stellar when it comes to providing this type of industry in the future. Thank you.
Question. How do people gain access to the curriculum you're developing?
You can check us out on the website as well.
Is like a course that you pay for, or like?
We're going to provide the curriculum and training for free.
Do any of the other members of the advisory committee have questions about what Ms. O'Donnell just presented?
Excellent. Thank you.
So I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Jasmine for her leadership here. And what I have heard, I've learned a lot tonight. But I've heard that we have an immediate need to really look at our USDO and our zoning. We need to engage the business community and the broader community around these locations, because this is coming at us, whether you agree with this or not, it's happening, right? And so we want to get it right because it is an opportunity, and I can understand people's concerns about concentrations, but I can also understand folks in the South End or, potentially saying, why are you going to take this industry and put it out on New Scotland Avenue? This could be an opportunity for us to grow and create economic stability in our neighborhood. And so those are the conversations that you will all be facilitating. I also heard that we need to be looking at assistance, and I'm looking at Matt Toporowski, and I know we've had some initial conversations within the city about providing some assistance around the card paperwork that is needed. And so we will be working in parallel with you. We think it's really important that those who need to access police records, access the documentation that's needed for that application, have the assistance to doing that. So we're going to be looking at how and if we at City Hall could facilitate something like that. And then I think we have two other issues. One is the money piece of this. And I think that's a really, really important conversation because there has been tremendous harm done in the city from the inequitable enforcement of cannabis laws. And so we've got to really, and I'm grateful for all of the folks on this board who, that's why they're here and that's what they're passionate about. So thank you for that. And the other is the harm reduction. People do have concerns. They have concerns about, underage consumption. They have concerns about quality of life issues. They have concerns about family members that may have use issues. So, we can't ignore that. We've got to make sure that we are taking a holistic approach and ensuring that we're doing this in a responsible way. So I think we have some committee work to do in figuring out where people's passions lie in doing that, because it is a lot for us to do. But thank you so much for your willingness to be part of this, to help us to make these decisions. And thank you all for coming out tonight.
And if everyone's willing, please feel free to stay and mingle and introduce yourselves to some of the guests. You are not required to. Thank you everyone for coming. Yeah.